My name's James Dawkins. I'm the Education Research Analyst at the Education Employers Task Force, and I work closely with the Director for Policy and Research, Dr. Anthony Mann. And today I'm going to be giving a presentation entitled Looking Back, Moving On, the views of young Britons aged 19 to 24 on their teenage experiences of school-mediated employee engagement and correlations with subsequent labour market outcomes. Firstly, what I'm going to do is, I've got an outline here. I'm going to give a bit of methodology, then I'm going to talk about participation rates and school type and age, give a bit of context, and then I'm going to talk about the perceived impacts across three outcome areas, which are segmented by age, school type, and level of qualification. Then I'm going to move on to labour market outcomes, and then I'm just going to do a few final thoughts. So firstly, the methodology. Now, back in February 2011, the Education Employers Task Force commissioned the YouGov to conduct a pro bono poll. And the context of the poll was, it was a survey designed to identify the extent to which young people between the ages of 19 and 24 engaged and survey designed to identify the extent to which young people engage and perceive four types of employer engagement activity as useful in terms of deciding on a career, getting a job, and getting into HE. Now, the four types of employer engagement activity include business mentoring, work experience, careers advice from employers, and enterprise activity. Now, the survey, the sample was large enough for us to segment by school age, gender and geographical location. It involved 987 people across the geographic location of Great Britain. And one of the main key questions which I'm going to be exploring today is there any variation across school types and age groups in terms of the usefulness of work experience and careers advice and labour market outcomes for these groups? So just to say that the statistics that we have were analysed in SPSS, and we're testing at the 10% significance level. So firstly, we asked our young people between 19 to 24, do you do or receive work experience, careers advice from employers, enterprise activity, or business mentoring? And what you'll see here is that of our sample of 987, an overwhelming, 85% did work experience, 45% said that they did careers, had careers advice from employers, 30% had enterprise activity with employers, and a further 19% did business mentoring. Now, what we've got here is some slides, and this is activity and participation rates by school type. So what we have, we asked our young people, did you do work experience? And then we're segmenting that against school type, so between the ages of 14 to 19. So what we have is in non-selective schools, 90% of pupils are doing work experience. In grammar schools, 86, and in independent schools, you've got 84.8. And when we're testing for significance to see if there's any relationship between, doing work experience and school type, the p-values for statistical significance came up as above the 10% level. So there's no relationship there. But if we move on to careers, what we see is our statistical significance level is 0.076, which is below our 10% level. And you can see from the proportions of students attending non-selective schools as sixth forms, grammars and independents, that non-selectives are the lowest in terms of undertaking receiving careers advice, and independent schools are the highest, and grammar schools sit in the middle. So we have a relationship there. We can be confident of that. There's a relationship between receiving careers advice and school type. Now, if I just move on quickly to enterprise activity and mentoring, again, the p-values are significant. And what we see here is that you can see a clear trend and relationship that those that are in non-selective schools, 27%, which is quite low, saying that they they received they did enterprise activity. Grammar schools 38 and independent schools 37.5. So there seems to be a relationship there. That's what the significance testing is telling us between enterprise activity and school enterprise activity and school type. If we move on to mentoring, the p-value there is insignificant. You can see from the proportions of young people between 14 to 19 in the different types of schools who've undertaken or received business mentoring. It's roughly, there's a general parity there. You've got 16% in non-selective schools, grammar schools, 16%, 15.7 independent schools, there's 15. So we don't have a relationship there. What I'm going to do now, just moving on to perceived impact. So what we did in our survey is we asked young people, so you've done work experience. How useful did you find it in terms of deciding on a job, getting a career after education, and getting into higher education? Now, just before I explain this, the percentages, integers outside of the brackets denote the responses. They were just positive responses. There are people who responded either they, in terms of usefulness of work experience, they said it was useful or very useful, and in the brackets they're numbers that denote the proportion of respondents that just replied to the question that we found work experience very useful in deciding on a job, getting a job after education, or getting into higher education. So what we have for the first table is school type, non-selective, grammar and independent. And what you find if we look at deciding on a job, you can see in non-selective schools, 54% of those that responded to the question said that they found the work experience that they undertook useful in deciding on a job. Now, grammars, again, slightly above. Independence, 81% of pupils there said that perceived work experience as useful in getting a job. And the p-value in deciding on a job, and the p-value is statistically significant there. So we can say that there is a definite relationship, or more than likely there's a relationship between the type of school that someone attends and their perception in terms of whether they felt that the work experience helped them to decide on the job. And this trend follows throughout. If you look at getting a job and getting into HE, again you see significant proportional disparities between non-selective and independent schools, and grammars sit in the middle, and also in terms of getting into higher education, young people at independent schools are significantly more likely to find the work experience that they undertook useful in helping them to get into higher education. Now, just moving on to careers advice. Again, we've got, if you look at the deciding on a job, there's a significant relationship between the type of school and the extent to which careers advice was perceived as helpful in deciding on a job. So in the non-selective, you've got 58% of students saying, yeah, you know, we found that useful, whereas in independent schools, 81%. That's 50, 60, that's a 23% disparity there, percentage points. In terms of getting the job and getting into HE, you know, they're insignificant, although there are proportional disparities do exist. So just moving on, what we did is a cross-tabulation between the age at which work experience was undertaken and the extent to which young people felt that it helped them, again, deciding on a career, getting a job, or moving into HE. And I think the thing to look at this slide, that is most striking, is that for 14 to 16-year-olds who've undertaken work experience, 50% of them found that the work experience was useful in terms of deciding on a career. and 25% useful in getting a job. 19% say that it was useful in getting to HE. Now, if you compare this to the 16 to 19-year-olds, you've got a large proportional disparity there of 34 percentage points when you're looking at the deciding on a career, or 24 percentage points, and what you have is 74% of 16 to 19-year-olds feel that work experience was useful in terms of deciding on a career. 48% of them feel it was useful in getting a job, and 47% feel that it was useful in getting them into higher education, and that's getting a job after education. And again, our p-values for this come up as significant. So what we can say is that we can be confident there's a relationship between work experience, the age at which work experience is undertaken, and its usefulness in terms of those three outcome areas. Similarly, looking at that did it at both ages, there's a negligible proportional disparity between doing it at 16 to 19 and also doing it at both ages. So it seems to be the case that if you do it at 16 to 9, if you did it at both ages, young people that did it at both ages feel that it was equally as useful as just having the one just doing it once at 16 to 19. Moving on to careers advice, again at 14 to 16, you've got significant proportional disparities for deciding on a career and getting into HE, and at 14 to 16. You can see there's 54% deciding on a career felt that it was useful, 40% for getting a job, and 30% for getting into higher education. And you can compare this to the 70% at 16 to 19 who felt that it was useful in deciding on a career, the 53% in terms of who felt that the careers advice they received from employers was helpful in getting a job after education, and the 53% who felt that it was useful in terms of getting into higher education. And again, our p-values for, as I said, for deciding on a career and getting into HE are statistically significant. So I think that it's important. We can see that at 16 to 19 years of age, it's more useful than as opposed to 14 to 16. That's receiving careers advice. So I'll just briefly move on to this table. There's a lot of data here, but I've highlighted the statistics which I think are important. What we did is we asked our young people how useful was work experience in, as I say, deciding on a career, the three outcome areas, and we cross-tabulated that against the highest level of qualifications, 0 to 5. And what is really striking about this table is that our level ones are getting feel that their work experience was high proportions of them feel that it was useful in terms of deciding on a career, getting a job, and getting into HE in comparison to every other kind of like level of qualification. And again, our p-values are statistically significant. So there's something there, there's a relationship, but we need to explore that to find out what exactly is going on there. And similarly, if we look at careers advice, how useful was careers advice across the three outcome areas? Again, high proportion level ones are perceiving the careers advice they receive from employers as very useful compared to levels 2, 3, 4, and 5. However, as you can see, there are still high proportions of people in both the work experience and careers advice categories who perceive their work experience as useful. So just moving on to NEETs now, what we decided to do was a correlation between NEET status at 1924 and the number of employer engagement activities that are undertaken whilst in education, 14 to 19. And we asked our young people, we said some schools and colleges arrange for their students to take part in activities which involve employers or local business people, providing things like work experience, etc. On how many different occasions do you remember such employer involvement in your education? And we cross-tabulated that against the question of which of the status best applies to you. And I think what is most thing to take away from this is looking at NEETs, those who have experienced no employer engagement activities, 21.6 21.6% of NEETs who'd experienced no employer engagement activities. If we move up to 4 or more, what you can see is that differs, that drops a lot. So we've got 1 in 20 saying who are in NEET status. So I mean, we've got a positive correlation there between NEET status and the number of employer engagement activities. So the more you experience, the less likely you are to become NEET, and that's statistically significant using Kendall's Tau significance test. Now, just moving on to future perceptions that young people had of themselves and in the labour market, we asked the same question on how many different occasions do you remember such employer involvement in education. But this time we asked young people to think about the sorts of jobs they'd like to be doing in 5 to 10 years' time, and how useful did they think what they were doing now is as a way of achieving this. Now, what you can see here, again, statistically significant, those who replied very useful to this question, when it's cross-tabulated against the number of employer engagement activities, you've got 0%, 35.7% of people answering very, very useful for no employer engagement activities. But the more employer engagement activities that you do, so for example, 4 or more, you've got 54.4%. So what you've got here is a statistically significant relationship that says that the more employer engagement activities that you do, I think the more likely you are to feel that it was that what you're doing was useful as a way of achieving what you'd like to do in 5 to 10 years' time. Now, moving on to wage premiums. Out of this sample of 987 people, we found that there was 176 of them we analysed. What happened was we had in our survey we had a salary band in 1K ranges. So we had asked young people, how much do you earn? And 176 of them replied to that, and we asked them, between 10 and 11K, between 12 and 13, and went up in 1K increments. And what we found is that predominantly 20 to 24-year-olds with level 3s as their highest qualification, they fell into that 176, the 176 people. And if we correlate this against the number of employer engagement activities that were recalled, but at the same time controlling for gender, age, ethnicity, and school type, what we found was that positive correlations exist. Now, what this means is that we're 95% certain that, not due to chance, that you get an increase in wages. And translate into this into something understandable. For each additional employer engagement activity that's undertaken, what you find generally, and there's a relationship here, is that you have a 4% or £750 increase in annual salary. Now, this has been confirmed by DFE analysts, and we're pretty sure that that this relationship exists. It's important, it's significant, and yeah. So I think it begs the question. All these statistics, all these numbers. Okay, so what's happening? I think that what we've done is conduct a textual analysis of written comments. So basically, we had a survey and we asked young people to respond to that. We asked the question, what are you, essentially, what are you getting out of your employee engagement activities? And people replied with many different things. There's 400 people, and what we've done is analyze these comments in a qualitative data analysis program. And this textual analysis of written comments suggests that it's not so much that people are gaining or accumulating human capital, but rather that they're accumulating social capital. So what they're doing is making they're networking, and what this is doing is it's serving to change attitudes, ambitions, and self-perceptions of people. So I think that there's a range of things going on. Wage premiums, as I say, is one of them. There's the positive correlation between age and careers advice that is received, and I think it's just unpacking this and doing a lot more research. So there's still things to do, but essentially what we're finding is that there's a accumulation of social capital, networking, and it's allowing people, it's increasing their social mobility. So yeah, that's what we think at the task force is going on. And that brings me, I've kind of rushed through, which I apologise, but that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I'll be happy to take, I'm sure there's lots of questions at the end. So thank you for listening.